Hi, good morning and afternoon. Welcome to Speak Her Mind. As all of you know, Speak Her Mind has been a platform for discussion around all sorts of issues related to equality and related to the hard things we deal with as women in business and as women in life. And so excited about today's program, particularly because we're talking about something that's I think a bit mysterious to a lot of us, which is around investing and how women and people of color and other opportunities are affected by not having access to some really interesting and opportunistic investments in technology and in the general world. And so today I'm joined by my two very good friends who are partners at a company and a firm called Operator Collective. And I want to tell you about each of them and their backgrounds because both of their stories are interesting and inspiring. But first, I actually want to ask Malin and Layla to tell us what is venture capitalism and how is it different from other investing? Because that is what's going to kick off our deep discussion today about how to get involved. Malin, can I start with you? What is venture capitalism anyways?
Well, first of all, Lisa and namely, thank you so much for having us. I've been so excited to do this, and we love you. We love the team at Namely. So many great people. So thank you for having us. So venture capital is I think the primary way in which a lot of the technology startups get funded. So you have a venture capital firm, and usually what you have is something called limited partners who invest into the venture capital fund. And then the venture capital fund via the partners make decisions on which companies to invest in. And so, as you can imagine, the dollars trickle down from the top and it influences what kind of founders get funded, what kind of companies, and it influences what the culture and the makeup of those companies and the success track of them are. So
And
that
it
is in
seems
a
like
nutshell.
such a common term out here in Silicon Valley, but as you're in business and understanding your own company and your own kind of investment strategies, it doesn't seem very accessible to like kind of a quote unquote normal consumer. And so, Layla, from your perspective, like you went from being an operator, which we'll talk about in a minute, to being a venture capitalist. And so what does that mean to you? Like, what does it mean to be a venture capitalist?
Um, so it's a great question. I want to echo what Malin said. Thank you for having us. And Lisa, you're a dear friend, so this is fun. I didn't mean to become a venture capitalist.
You didn't
This was
mean
an
it?
accident. Didn't mean to do this.
Oops.
For me, this all sort of started from a place of income inequality. That's like sort of where my root always is. Like when people aren't being paid fairly or don't have a fair shot at making money, specifically in this country, it's very difficult to change your life and change the
Yeah.
life of the people around you. So I had noticed, I worked at Salesforce for a really long time and I was on the product side, and I'd noticed that the men were all getting asked to be LPs in funds or to angel invest in
Hmm.
things or all these different opportunities. And I was not getting any of those opportunities until I sort of pitched a fit. And then someone let me into their fund and we invested in Robinhood early and made a lot of money. And so for me,
Oh,
it had
that's
always
awesome. I
been,
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah. So for me, it had always been a way, like it felt like an area, much like you said, like I didn't know how to start. Even if I had capital to write a check, what was I going to like go to Sand Hill Road and like get my checkbook out and
Right.
be like, hey. Um, so that's where Malin's genius really came in, because we'd all sort of seen the same problem and tried to figure out how to approach it. Like my friend April, they built hashtag angels, which is their whole premise was, if we write a Medium post, will we become investors? And it worked, right? They
Yeah.
said we're investors, and then all of a sudden people started asking them to invest. So like Malin took it a step further and came up with this way to build a community of operators, all putting their money together, all putting their energy towards investing in what we know. And if you look at the LPs and Operator Collective, a lot of them are enterprise software executives. You know,
Right.
that's
Right.
who I am. That's what you are,
Yep.
Elisa. You know, like that's where we came from.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the roots of Operator Collective in just a minute. I want to go now to both of your backgrounds. And Layla, we'll start with you because you gave us a bit of a hint with your time at Salesforce. I mean, you have been a powerful force in Silicon Valley in enterprise software, specifically with notable time at Salesforce. I want you to just give the audience a sense of your roots as an operating executive. And if you could you please just touch on the work that you did at Salesforce for gender equality of pay?
Sure. Well, touche to you, my dear. Yeah, so I grew up in product management. I worked at a whole bunch of startups. The last one got sold to Oracle, and I ended up at Salesforce, luckily. So I worked at Salesforce for almost 12 years. I built the app exchange there. I ran a number of other products there. The thing that Elisa was referring to is I got together with my friend Cindy Robbins like 7 years ago, which makes me feel super old, but whatever. It was easier when I was like 3 years ago, but whatever, like 7 years ago.
7 years of a track record of what you're about to say. So take
Spoken
it.
like a true CEO. We went to Mark Benioff and we said that women aren't being paid the same as the men. And that we went through the plan, and it was a big thing, and we worked on it for a really long time, but that sort of set off the equal pay initiative that kind of ran through tech and then into corporate America. And then that just sort of, that was the tip of the iceberg for me. I also became the exec sponsor of the Black Employee Resource Group at Salesforce, which led to me listening to a lot of what it must be like. I mean, I'll never understand, but what it was like to be Black in tech at Salesforce in corporate America, and trying to understand that, even though I never will. So, but that just sort of opened my eyes to how unfair everything was. And then that we could actually do something to change it became very empowering.
Well, how perfect that your operator experience then ultimately landed at Operator Collective on the other side, which is as an investor and a decision maker on where the funds are going to go, which we're going to get into in a second. And Layla, on behalf of all of us, thanks for blazing the trail, because that equality initiative led to obviously a domino effect. Like Salesforce is doing it, and then all sorts of other companies woke up and figured out they have to do something too. So we owe you for that. And Malin, so your background is also very interesting and incredibly different than what you would expect, as now sitting there as a venture capitalist making funding decisions. You're a lawyer by trade, and have been an attorney for many, many years. Tell our audience a little bit about your background as an attorney and what was inspired you to be the founder of Operator Collective and literally change everything in your life to go make this fund happen.
I have a very bizarre background to be a venture capitalist. So I started out my career as an intellectual property attorney focusing on patents. And actually that's kind of where I started, which was that was my first organization that I was a part of building and scaling up. This is Operator Collective is the fourth. And as I said, everything was prepped to this point, right? In life. But the first one, but there's patterns that we saw, which is the first organization was Women in Patent Law, of which there were very, very, very few, because there was very, very few women who were, who had technical degrees, and then work your way up to be senior in an organization. And the second one was, and lots of times when you start companies, you look at a problem that you see, was a venture-backed company that we took from 0 to 100 million, sold to the enterprise, right? And we took 0 to 100 million in public in 3 years. And the thing is I was such an outsider to venture that I actually didn't realize that was unusual. Right, of what we did. Yeah. And then the third one was being a part of SaaStr, which huge online and virtual and in-person community for learning and events. Right. And what I learned as a part of this was that actually, sometimes when you're immersed in something, you don't actually realize that you actually know a fair amount about what you're immersed in. And so after we actually sold the company back to private equity and took it private again, I started to spend more of my time in the venture world and realized that people were actually seeking out my skill set. And I was actually kind of surprised that people didn't actually know the things that I thought that everyone would know, which is how do you navigate an enterprise? How do you sell to an enterprise? How do you buy enterprise software? Things like that. And so I saw a pattern, which was that, hey, both VCs and founders were wanting, my skill set. And I very quickly realized, well, one, that doesn't scale. And two, the reason they want to access people like me is they actually don't really know people like me, right? The people like me don't hang out at bars at 5 p.m. with hoodie wearing sweatshirt guys. Like, we want to go home, right? Women are, we want to go home. We want to see our kids. We want to see, we want to maybe get some exercise, things like that. And so So what I realized is that if we could find a way to make the venture world fit into the busy lives of amazing operators, a lot of whom were women and people of color, then that's a way that we could make venture accessible. Because as you and Layla said, it's highly inaccessible, right? If it's not very accessible. How do you start, right?
Well, and you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
I was working in Silicon Valley for literally 25 years and never had the opportunity to invest. Layla talked about, she kind of pitched a fit and got into an investment that actually paid off for her, which is awesome. But the first time I had access was after working for a while as a CEO at a venture backed company. They offered me the opportunity to go into their fund, and I was like, oh, what's oh and all these other people had been in it all this time. All these other guys had been in it all this time. So it took, I didn't know I was working towards that. I just didn't have any access to it. So I didn't know that that existed to actually
Well,
participate, which gets to the vision and mission of Operator Collective, if you want to move in that direction, Malin.
yeah, and so that's exactly the point, though. It's just the access is
Yeah.
that you had to work your way up, become the CEO,
Yeah.
right? Before they asked you to be part of the club. Now,
I
if
didn't
that's
know
how
it
only
was,
women
I
and
didn't
people
even
of
know it
color
existed, to
have
be
to wait,
honest.
right,
Yeah.
until they are the CEO of an enterprise software company.
It's not going to happen. Like, right, exactly. And so you come along and you see all of this happening and you create Operator Collective. So tell us now, let's get into what is Operator Collective, why you founded it in the first place. And then Layla, I'm going to ask you how the heck you became partners with Malin, with your two incredibly different backgrounds, which is awesome to see. Malin?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I saw, which was that the venture world, it seems so inaccessible. It seems so like, wow. And the thing is the venture world is not transparent, right? You don't know who the LPs are.
Right. It's not like the public markets. You
Yeah.
invest in a public stock, you watch it go up, you watch it go down, you decide when you keep it, you decide when you sell it.
And in fact, people don't even tell you who their LPs are.
Right.
And
Right.
because it's all, lots of reasons. And so the thought was, well, what if you could make venture accessible? Because one of the things we wanted to do, Layla, when she was trying to, she was working with trying to bring together a group after #Angels was put together, et cetera, was that what if you could bring together a group and make it accessible? Because we want to have more women investing,
Right.
and people of color investing for whom venture is not accessible, so that we can expand wealth creation. In a way, so it's not just that same group of PayPal founders again and again, right? When remember when Lyft went public and New York Times Digital had this little graphic that was like the same group of PayPal founders are getting rich again and again, and it kept just moving between this and then Palantir and then Lyft and then this. We're like, this is what we're disrupting. It's not that we're trying to create a separate ecosystem just for women and people of color, but it's like we're going to expand wealth creation so we can work with those and expand it. And so that's what Operator Collective is, which is instead of just a couple of CEOs or really, really rich family offices or foundations or endowments that are investors in the venture fund, we have 137 operator LPs, and they are 90% women, 40% people of color, 70%. Layla took a survey right before we launched to say how many people have invested in venture before, and 70% of them had never invested in venture before.
I'm not surprised.
Primary reason was, no access to deal flow, hadn't been asked.
You did something else though, Malin, that you're leaving out that I want to point out, and that is that you created a lower barrier to entry by making sure that the amount you invested at a minimum wasn't so high that even though you offered it to me, I can't afford it.
So I want Layla actually to talk about the sliding scale, because it was something that we were working for, but she really solidified it. And it was a lot of her experience that she had with equal pay, actually.
All right, awesome. So Layla, over to you on sliding scale, and also how did you become partners after Malin founded Operator Collective, and then you went in all force? Would love to hear that story.
Yeah. So on the scale, I was leaving Salesforce. I started working with Malin just as an advisor to begin with, right? And helping fundraise, right? Because as Malin sort of alluded to this, but I had been like, we should be investing. And I had gone to a whole bunch of the women that are in the current fund, like Erica Schultz and Claire Hughes Johnson and all these people, and been like, let's all put some money in. And I'd gone to April Underwood and asked her how she did #Angels. But I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I ran the app exchange. Like, I conflict out of everything I would want to invest in, right? So it never came to fruition. So when Malin sort of explained to me what she was doing, I was all in, and I'd already talked to a lot of people about this. So I had kind of a bench of folks that were queued up and ready to start investing once we figured out how we were going to do it, right? And so in that process, Malin and I were working, and some of the people, someone very specifically that I wanted desperately in the fund, just could not pay $250K. You know, she was trying to save money to buy a house. She had not been paid fairly all the way through her career. She had not been promoted the way she should have been for the work she'd done. And Mal and I were talking about it. We both really wanted her in the fund. And then we came up with this idea where we were like, we'll have a sliding scale. So some people, you know, people that are in those types of circumstances that are huge value add to the community and the portfolio companies and operator collective in general, they can join in at a 10K range. And then we have other individuals in the fund who put in multiple millions of dollars, right? But it allowed us the flexibility to create the type of community we really wanted, which was diverse and full of different types of people with different skill sets.
Has
so that's
been
that one. And then for the partnership piece, you want me to get it?
Yeah, so look, I was just going to say that that's just so different. I want everyone to understand it's so different, so unique. And the reason that you can say it's 90% females, it's 40% people of color, is because of that sliding scale. And when you have meetings around your community and you're sharing information and you're teaching and educating about venture, you include all of those investors as equals. And that just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, and on the scale, people are doing it, right? Like I think Malin does too, but I talk to a lot of people about the scale and they're like, how do you work the scale? How do you make it so? Because it's deliberate. Like that's what Malin and I did. Once we joined up, we were very deliberate in how we created everything and what we went after and what we were trying to do. Look, on the partnership side, Malin and I couldn't be more different. Like we are completely different people. The honest truth is in our core, we are very similar. Like we believe in family. We're both first generation. We both grew up in the Bay Area. We didn't move here to get rich. This is our hometown. Our parents live here. Our siblings live here. Like, we are both deeply devoted to our children and our work has to be meaningful. So on all the things that count, we are 100% the same, but we are totally different style-wise. And that's been a superpower for us. That's allowed us to do things in Fund One that other people haven't been able to do. And that's allowed us to create in really what has been a short time. I mean, you know, the fund is not, people are like, oh, you guys have been around for like 5 years. I'm like, you're bananas. We've been we're like 2, you know, a little longer for when Malin started sort of putting it together. But I think why people see that and sort of respond to that is because specifically around how we thought about Fund One and like how we're putting everything together, we very much used each other's skill sets and had a deep base of trust. Look, partnership's hard. Like in any moment in life, partnerships are tough. So you have to really believe in the person you're partnering with through the good and the bad times. And we've definitely worked hard to do that with each other. So, and you know, when you can, teams made up of people that are all the same and that look the same and think the same and react the same, make really boring software and really big trust me. And so like we didn't want a boring software and we didn't want to invest in boring companies. And together we have managed to do that in spades. So it's pretty cool.
And what's it been like competitively? As we talked about these big funds, they've been established for a long time. They have incredible reputations and access, and huge dollars to put into these startups and companies. If they decide they want to put in a bunch of money, they can sort of like have the C's part and put in their bunch of money, and everybody else kind of gets thrown overboard. So how have you competed to get into the companies that you're funding? Many of them, you know, and the audience can look on your website and see the types of companies that are in your portfolio. Many of them are very, not only very successful, of course, but have big VCs backing them as well. How do you get in and make your pitch and get your slice of the pie for the fund?
So I'll answer and then Malin can jump in. Look, founders are more discerning. VC is more than writing a check. VC used to be how big is your checkbook and how fast can you write the check. The game has changed. And more than anything, big checks, a lot of people have big checkbooks now. It's not just 4 or 5 people that have checkbooks. And founders want people that know how to do it. Once they get the money, they have to start doing things like hiring people, building process, scaling things, thinking about partnership strategies, extending their sales team. Like the minute the check is written, they actually need people like the three of us and like people on this call that have done it before. So the fact that Operator Collective harnesses the operational power of all these people for the companies that get invested in makes a big difference.
Yeah. Malin, anything to add on that? I think that's hard. I think that competitive dynamic is hard.
But everything that we did with this fund was deliberate. I mean, when you have had the benefit of, the experiences that is and to be able to whiteboard and create something from scratch, you can do it differently. So we knew that if we could bring these talented group of operators who had been left out and for whom venture wasn't accessible, that most founders would want to bring that in. They just don't know how to access people like us because they don't know people like us. And so it was very deliberate. My first job when I was 14 was as a telemarketer. I don't know if you know that. I was, I never wanted to go back to cold calling ever again. It's good training, by the way.
Well, those of us who have done it never want to do it again, but it teaches you a lot.
It is a great training. And so what was very deliberate about, if we could create a product, right, that founders want, because as Layla said, there's a lot of money chasing the founders right now. And so if you could create a product that founders wanted and needed, which is this deep operating talent from people from diverse backgrounds, not just diverse in terms of race and gender, but also in terms of have built up companies at this stage and that stage, because the needs change, right? Depending on you need. And then we knew that if we did that, we would also have VCs who wanted to bring us into their deals, because most smart VCs and thoughtful VCs know, I don't want to take the whole thing, because it takes a village to be able to help these companies be successful. And while a lot of VCs these days do talk about like, oh, we have an operator, we have this, it's like any new startup. It's hard to take a traditional model and just like bolt on, a new feature on the side. Yeah. We literally tore down the venture model and rebuilt it from the ground up to optimize for busy operators who have day jobs, so that the venture world now conforms to something that fits their lifestyle, as opposed to saying, now you have to leave your job at 5 p.m. to go hang out at these bars to go meet these people.
Right. But you do have, in addition to that, though, you have a pretty common practice, because since your LPs are generally operators and have the experience, that you can connect them with your startup teams and say, hey, can you share the value of your experience with some of the younger or less experienced operators in your funds? And everybody has skin in the game for these companies to be successful. I think that's also really special about Operator Collective. Layla, you mentioned when you were at Salesforce that you were sponsoring Black employee experience and what that was like. And then you went to Operator Collective, and you didn't stop at everything that you and Malin just talked to us about in terms of the Operator Collective mission. You also worked on the Black Venture Institute. Can you talk to us about what is the Black Venture Institute and why that's so critical to the mission as well?
Sure. So when I got into venture, remember the accidental venture capitalist, and I was learning all of this, and Malin was helping me learn a lot of this stuff. I remember, numerous times I would say to Malin, like, I wish I could just go to a class for like a week. I'm like, what's a SPAC? Why do I care? What are information rights? Why do I care? How hard do I push for pro rata? Why do I care about pro rata? Like, there was just, and all it was were terms. Like, I can play the same game with building enterprise software and Scrum. Right. I can say all the same kind of things to you about that, and you'll feel like you don't understand what I'm talking about if you're not in the game. It's just vernacular. It's all, the concepts aren't that complicated once you actually understand what they all mean. So I've been saying that. And then when George Floyd was murdered, it was just like this past year has been very desperate and hard with COVID and staying home. And then George Floyd, I was feeling very bad. And I was talking to Mel, and I was like, I got to do something. Like, we got to do something. It just doesn't feel right. And I sit on the board of the part of the engineering school at Cal, Berkeley. So I called the dean, who's a good friend, and I asked her, like, I know we have a class in venture capital, like somewhere in the university. Let's find it. I found the class and I talked to the professor, and I basically was like, I want to change everything about this class, and we're going to make all the professors Black and all of the participants are going to be Black, and we're going to do this thing. So we came up with Black Venture Institute, which is essentially a 2-week course that's run with me and Black VC. Salesforce also sponsored it because we didn't want to create an access point that had another gate in front of it. Like, oh,
Right.
we'll teach you if you pay us some money. So
Right.
we got Salesforce involved, and they very generously sponsored it. So we've run 2 cohorts. The basic premise is before we started BVI, only 75 Black people could write checks in venture in the United States, which is appalling. And so the notion was we're going to train 50 Black operating executives twice a year, take them through this 2-week
From all
Zoom
over the
course.
country or from where?
All over the country.
All
From
over
all
the
over the country.
Uh-huh.
And we take them through a very intensive 2-week course where we teach them venture capital. They negotiate cap tables, they negotiate term sheets. They also meet a whole bunch of people from the
Right.
industry, like that are doing it, that have been doing it, to talk about their experience. So it's become a very enriching and awesome place. We have 100 grads through so far. Many of them have gotten jobs in venture. A lot of them are angel investing together. It very much is in the guise of Operator Collective, in so much as the notion was, we've got to make it easier to walk through this door. Whether you walk through or not is your decision. And let's be
Right.
clear, a lot of venture capital is straight up gambling, right? Like there's a component to this where like you really have to be ready to know what you're doing with the money, and you can't enter into it slowly. Funds are different, being an LP, like what we set up, but angel investing, things like that. So really just giving people that awareness around what they're capable of doing. And, sometimes shoving the money under the mattress is not the best idea.
So Layla, back to the you don't know what you don't know. How do people know about this class and get signed up and have access to attending what you just said?
So Black VC has been a huge partner in this, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting with regard to that. You can apply. We have a website, Black Venture Institute. You can apply. We have a whole process. We review all the applications. You can, if you don't get in, you should reapply. I believe in persistence. But there's a way, there's a structure, and Black VC has really spearheaded the running of that component. But we run it twice a year, 50 students each time. And you can follow us on Twitter. You can learn a lot about sort of what we're doing by just kind of getting more involved on social too.
Yeah, and I wanted you to talk about that. It's so aligned with what the mission of SpeakHer Mind and this platform is because we talk a lot about how do you open doors for each other, because these doors, you don't even know they're closed. And look at what you just described with these classes. All of a sudden, you're equipped to have access versus having access or not even knowing that access, what to do with it if it was presented to you. So super important, and I know really near and dear to Operator Collective's total mission. And Melon, I want to go to you now and talk about, if we could, kind of your own life experience, which, you did a really brave thing very recently. I think it was about a month, maybe a month ago. And you wrote a post about what it's like growing up as an Asian American. And I don't remember the exact title of the post, but it had the word invisible in it. That I remember very clearly, because when you posted, I went, wow, okay, what does that feel like? So would you mind sharing like what that post was about for you and why it's really important?
Yeah. So as Layla said, we're very different. And I'm so grateful for that, because Layla has pushed me, right, and encouraged me and supported me and given me sort of the space to do things that I thought I would never really be comfortable talking about.
How cool is that to have a partner that you feel that way about? That's awesome.
Yeah. And so one of these things, so starting like through a little bit about, when George Floyd happened and things like that, it's like when there's always a little bit of guilt, right? Of like growing up Asian, in that like we didn't, like as much as we had bias and discrimination, we always just sort of hid it and put it away, because the fact is like, I don't have to worry about running on the street, right? And having and physically, well, actually now maybe physically in danger, but it's at a different level. And so it's like, you didn't talk about this stuff. And then I started to talk about this with Layla and some of the team. And what I realized is they actually had no clue that there was any sort of discrimination or bias or racism that I dealt with even today, right, as an adult and also growing up, because the fact is like none of us ever talked about it.
Right.
Because, and on so many levels, why did we not talk about it? It's embarrassment. It's not wanting to be different, that how much we've been conditioned all our lives to not rock the boat. How much we've been conditioned to say, you know what, if we can just blend in, we can do. And so what I, as a result of some of the violence that was happening, had a lot of support from, from the people around me. And so ended up writing a piece that talked about, why weren't we speaking up? What are my experiences? Because my experiences were not unique, but what's happening is that none of us were talking about it. And in fact, I was very hesitant to actually write that piece because I, for a lot of reasons, but one, like, especially, I mean, I think it's not just Asian immigrants, but like I never told my parents any of this stuff because you didn't want them to worry, because your parents worked so hard to get you to this point that the last thing you want to do is have them feel like they didn't create a better life for you. And then they would just worry to death. And then you would worry that they were worrying. And then it's just like, it's a whole thing. And so I ended up writing this, with a, you can imagine the Layla in the background of like, a few shoves and a few pushes, which I needed and am grateful for, and really shared it. And what came out of this is that a lot of other people started sharing too. I wasn't the first one to share, right? Some other people shared, and then I started sharing, and then a lot of people started to share their stories too. And what became clear is that if we don't talk about these things, people don't know. How would you ever know? I didn't talk to my parents about this. My siblings had no clue. And,
so clarify for us on the post, like with all of the courage it took to post that, is that really when your parents or your siblings kind of experienced it with you, but was that when you kind of had to make it true with your parents that, hey, like this was really hard and these things happened to me?
Yeah. I mean, so I didn't tell them I wrote it because I didn't want them to worry. And actually I was in Atlanta around the time that the Atlanta stuff was happening.
Right.
And I really didn't want them to worry about that. I was in Georgia actually. And so then I get this email from my mom and she's like, I saw this post, I saw your article that you wrote. And I was like, oh, crap. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, now they're going to be all worried. And she says, and she was very proud, but she's like, it's also heartbreaking to me because I thought that discrimination like that only happened to old people like us who don't speak English.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is just heartbreaking, right? Which you know that it happens to them all the time, but they don't talk about it either. And they would never talk about it to us because they don't want us to worry. And then my siblings, were like, on all the text string be like, I had no idea that this happened. We know exactly, like, I know exactly what house it was that, that I walked by. And so, I think it was a positive, but it was certainly like, then I was just worried that they were going to be worried, but we're okay. We're all worrying about each other, but we're okay. But I think in the end, it was, I felt good about doing it because I feel like if we don't talk about it, then nobody knows. And if nobody knows, then
no change happens.
Exactly.
No change can happen. So tremendous move for you to do that. And for those of you who want to check out the post, just go to Malin's LinkedIn profile and click on the post and you can read the whole thing, which is, a really, really special and enlightening article that she put out there. And it also highlights, the importance of community and support, friendships, connections, people that will be around you for these hard times. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Malin, and Layla, I think you mentioned it too, is that we don't want to create this separate place for women and people of color to invest. Like that's incredibly limiting. So we're going to go over here and do this, what will end up be a little thing because you're not in the big game. And what you decided is we got to be in the big game. And one of the questions from our attendees is spot on around how do you create allies with the guys who have all the access and the money naturally, a part of their job, a part of what they're doing every day. And then suddenly you're trying to break the model, which is disruptive in a good way for the ones who are trying to break it. It could be disruptive in an annoying way for those who don't want to change. So let's talk a little bit about how you create really strong relationships and trust with the people who are in the big game, which tend to be mostly males, and make this thing successful. Who wants to go first?
I can jump in, and then Layla can add. So so one of the things that Layla said earlier is that, you know, we're very different in many ways, but in some ways at our core we're very similar, and that's because we're deeply values aligned. And so that's the thing that we look for with everyone that we fund, with people that we co-invest with, et cetera. And so and it was it was very deliberate to not create. Can you imagine if we created a fund that only invested in women CEOs or women founders?
Well, that's the point. It's like,
yeah, right. It doesn't make sense,
how
especially
far
in the
can you
enterprise.
go?
We
Right.
only do the enterprise, right?
Right.
Like, actually, there are a lot of female founders.
I know, but it's a dinner party. It's not a, it's not you know, a conference.
And so, and then what we found, and I think, you know, is that there's a lot of white males, right, who do hold a lot of the power, who want to help, but what are they going to do? Create a dinner party for us?
Right.
Or hang out with us? And so what we wanted to do was, like, we give them a space and we tell them what we want from them, and we ask them for their support, and they take that, and it's been enormous. We invest in founders from all backgrounds. We co-invest in, you know, with investors from all backgrounds. So it was very deliberate about, one, this is about money making, right? This is not charity, right? This is about creating financially aligned incentives that happen to be consistent with what we think is going to drive progress and positive change in the world, which is badass operating talent who know how to build and scale up all the iconic, you know, the companies from Salesforce to Stripe to Google to you know, to Slack and beyond. And that if we could build that any founder and any VC would want us to co-invest with them. And then the fact that we are 90% women, 40% people of color, and have a naturally more diverse network, and you know, is gravy on top of that. And so that's really what it was, which was deliberately creating something that that we knew was going to be valuable and useful regardless of what your gender or background is. And then second, telling them and asking them for how we want them to be able to be to help and be part of this.
Layla, has that clarity of action helped the guys say yes? Is that part of what you think the success is?
I mean, listen, it's competitive. We're not going to like sugarcoat it, but we have been helped a lot, and there's been a lot of people rowing in the boat with us. And honestly, not to sound cocky, but the value we deliver, it does not exist in Silicon Valley right now. There is no fund like ours. There are lots that are popping up, but you just don't get to talk to the person that built the app exchange and ran, like, COO of Stripe and the CEO of Namely. You just don't get to talk to these people when you're in a jam. And sometimes a half an hour with one of those people can save you $60,000 in 6 months in consulting that's not going to solve your problem, right?
Yeah.
So founders see us as a way to speed their business up. And that, to Malin's point, we don't just write a check. Like, we deliver a product to the founder, and it's the product they exactly need at that moment, which is, what do I do?
Yeah. So now we have a stream of questions of how do we invest in Operator Collective? So let's take this as a 1-2 step. Okay. There's some questions around, if I don't really understand yet the kind of basics of VC land, where do I go? Like, I'm not ready to invest or to make a decision, but I want to get educated about a decision. Where do I go if I can't go to the Black Venture Institute in Berkeley? Where do I go? Step one. And then step two is, if I am interested in Operator Collective and they're raising again sometime in the future, how do I get involved in Operator Collective? Can we take those two questions? Malin, why don't you take the first one, Layla the second?
Yeah. So everyone, I hope you all join our community, because the fund is one part of is one part of Operator Collective. The community is this much bigger, right? And it is about creating a community in the venture world and a space for operators, because as we know, right, all the Midas lists and all these other things are all about the founders and the VCs, but we all know that that you can't build and scale up a company without the operators, people who actually, that you would actually hire and bring in who have these skills. And in fact, one of the things we say is the founders who can be part of our community are only the founders who know how to, build and scale. So it's a special group of people. And so you should be part of our community. I hope you go to operatorcollective.com, sign up for our mailing list. We'll have events again, but we also have online events. And a big part of what Layla and I are passionate about and our team are passionate about is about education, because it doesn't need to be this murky. The more that you know, the more, the more power that you have to be able to make decisions about what you want to be doing. So I would absolutely start with that. And I hope that, follow us on social media. Layla's big thing. I'm not, I was never active on Twitter, former lawyer. It's just still hard for me to talk in public about certain things. And so, but like
you're getting over it. You're getting over it.
If you want to understand this bizarre venture world and the way that these VCs talk to each other, like just watch and listen on Twitter. It's very bizarre, but it's highly educational. So I lurk more than I actually post, but I would say Layla's far more interesting on Twitter. So you should follow her. You can follow me too, but Layla's far more interesting. So anyway, so I would say get educated by following some key people on Twitter. Go to Operator Collective and see who we're following. Follow us so that you can be part of the community. And then slowly you'll start to learn, and it demystifies it.
And Erin from the Namely team has posted in the chat the Operator Collective website. So you can go there and do all the things that Malin just walked through. Layla, anything different to do if you're thinking right now, I actually want to invest in Operator Collective. I'm already prepared to take that leap. Is there any way to get involved, or just follow what Malin just said in terms of signing up to the community?
I think you start with what Malin said. I'll also echo in there on the Twitter thing. I think Malin makes a really good point. I learned a lot about venture capital on Twitter. Like a ton. And another group to follow is All Raise, right? I think they have great information sort of for people that are interested in learning more about venture. And Black VC is another great org to sort of, you don't have to be Black to follow Black VC or to be, so just sort of, I think there's some other spots. As far as Operator Collective is concerned, get in touch with us. We're not raising another fund right now, but that's probably on the horizon at some point. So get in touch with us and let us know, and we'll put you on the list. But really, you can educate yourself in a lot of ways. It feels like it's unattainable, but what Malin said, I learned a lot about venture capital on Twitter. So you really can, just by watching certain people, figure out a lot of what's going on. You just have to do a little investment.
Yeah, and both of you talked about it from the perspective of learning about VC, which is what the question was. But I'll just add, in terms of learning about how it works from an operator perspective, I think All Raise was a wonderful suggestion. So many people on the call are, and a part of the Speaker Mind community, are people who have great experience to offer, but don't yet have the visibility. They aren't getting the inbound calls of, hey, can you be an advisor to this company? Or because if you become an advisor or a part of a startup board, you can really learn about this stuff hands-on. And so many of the Speaker Mind community members are qualified for that. Get involved in All Raise, because All Raise is always looking to also connect, not just for investing, but also for help with operators. So, and a great complementary vision from Operator Collective. So thanks for bringing up that.
And one other suggestion I have, Elisa, with that, because I actually just had this conversation yesterday with someone who is, a very high, like a VP level executive at a public company. She's like, how do I start to get involved? And one of the things is, many of you actually have a platform where you are right now. Like when I was practicing law, 15 plus years ago, I was like, oh, I only know about law, right? Like people want to talk to me because I'm a legal expert on this. But the fact is that, whatever your role is within your company and organization, you are an expert, and you can become an expert, and even more of an expert in that business, right? So you know that business. And so look at one of the ways of getting involved with startups, to the extent you're interested, is that look at the startups that are doing innovative things in this space. whether it's, legal tech, or whether it's a broader, right, networking, or a particular type of, software that you guys are doing. And so use that to be able to learn about the things, because you do also have a lot of you are in a position to buy software, use software, bring things in. And so that's a way of meeting some of the people, because then also you also end up being able to do your job better when you can bring in innovative, solutions that help everyone do their, help the company run better. So I would do that. And then also is, ultimately, a lot of these advisor and board positions end up coming from relationships.
Yeah.
So when you meet with someone, it's not like, hey, I want an advisor position. I'm overstating it because I don't think most people do. Or like, hey, I'm looking for a board position. Like that's almost like jumping to getting engaged before you've even started dating, or even like you just started looking online a little bit. And so part of it
Good analogy. That doesn't sound fun at all.
because it's like, oh no, I'm not ready yet. Right?
Exactly.
Occasionally, by the way, that could work. Arranged marriages do work, right?
That's a different webcast.
And so what I would say is, like, if you're starting to just get involved, is just learn, right? Just meet people.
Yeah.
And then what you'll find is like, oh, like I actually know a lot about X and I really love X. And then just use it as relationship building, use it as like learning about what people are doing. And then I do think that very naturally, those relationships turn into advising opportunities. They turn into, they usually take more time, board opportunities, as well as you may really love some of these companies and just say, hey, I actually do want to angel invest in this.
So as we bring this Speaker Mind episode to a close, we always want to leave with some very specific advice on how to make a difference. And I think in the last, handful of minutes, we've done a lot of advice around yourself. You can go here and do this, and you could, all fantastic advice from both of you. And underrepresented people tend to have less visibility for their skills and experiences, and therefore it just gets even harder to figure out how you can get access to new experiences and opportunities. So I want to turn the question to not what you can do for yourself, but what could you do for someone else? And one of the things that is really important in this community is to lift each other up. And as you lift each other up, what happens is good stuff comes back too. And so if you had one piece of advice for the Speaker Mind community members on what they could do for someone else who is underrepresented, whether it's a female colleague, or whether it's a Black male colleague, or whether it's a female Hispanic colleague, or Asian, people who are underrepresented, what would be the thing that you would say, this is what you could do for someone else today that would make a difference to their access? Because sometimes the small things make big life impact. When someone actually says yes to you, then things change for you, and you can think of those experiences in your own career. So what would you advise?
Okay, I'll go first. The honest truth is everyone that's grown up here is a little racist and a little sexist. Everyone that's grown up in the Western world just has that proclivity because it's the way society was sort of put together. So the first thing you have to do is sort of own that a little bit, and own that you don't understand other people's experience, right? And then I think the most powerful thing you can do is ask someone how you can help them, right? What I found in BVI, which has been a real eye-opener to me, is how many times the fellows in BVI come to me and they're like, this is the first time anyone's like tried to fill my cup. I feel like since George Floyd died, I've just been trying to fill everyone's cup because everyone's trying to figure out what they should do, or how they should think, or what they should feel about, or what does it feel like to be this or that. And so that really stuck with me. And so now I always am walking around thinking, like, how can I fill someone else's cup, right? How can I help someone else? Like, and if I don't know the answer, because I'm white, middle-class soccer mom who lives in the suburbs, I know some things, but I don't know a lot of other things, right? So I think you can ask people and go in there with the thought of like, how am I going to help them fill their cup, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, what great advice, Layla, because sometimes we also make assumptions that so-and-so wants this kind of help because I think they should be on this track. And God, most of the time we're so wrong. So, your advice of just reaching out to someone today to say, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you? Like, how hard is that? That's easy. Let's make the commitment. We'll do that today. Malin, anything else from you on that topic?
Yeah, in terms of, introductions are huge, right? And so maybe this is, once you know what is it they're interested in. I'm interested in, joining a board someday. I'm interested in doing this. And so making the intros are key. A lot of people, have opened doors for us, and also how you make those intros, right? Studies have shown, you guys have probably heard this, right? Like when a woman gives a speech versus a male, depending on how that person has been introduced,
Yeah.
has impact on how it's. And I used to have a boss who was actually pretty brilliant at this. This is when I was still a lawyer. He would say, he was the general counsel. He would say, "This is Malin. There's a reason why she has intellectual property in her title, and I don't." Right. And so he was brilliant
Uh-huh.
at immediately
Uh-huh.
being like, she's the brilliant one. She's the smart one.
Yeah.
And here I am just making an intro for you. And, obviously not all of you guys have the benefit of having an intellectual in your title, but you know what I mean? Which is like, this is Elisa. I know her. She's done X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. And when it comes from someone like you, who you are introducing to, you have so much credibility. And it's very hard, I think, for women and people of color to try and self-promote because it just doesn't come across very well. And so that's a second one, I guess I will add to it, is that so if you look at Twitter, you look at and things like that, um, lift up others. And this is what you said, Elisa, which is amplify their messages, right? Amplify, like, their successes, because it is very hard, I think, for women and people of color to do it for themselves, because oftentimes we kind of get blasted for it. It's like, oh, she's just self-promoting again.
Malin, what a huge topic you've brought up around that self-promotion. Like, who's going to advocate for you if you don't do it for yourself? And doing it for others brings it back to you. And it all is like this wonderful goodwill circle that starts to happen. And it needs to be authentic. You don't want to just do it because you like someone. You want to do it because someone has like some real skills, talents, chops, smarts, to be introduced in that way. And you build your credibility along the way. As you progress in your career, and I think in life, probably as women, but also just generally as people, we remember, look at what Layla and Malin just said. You remember very specific people who opened doors for you. You remember 15 years ago, your boss introduced you that way and people knew, oh, like before you even had a word come out of your mouth, it's like, oh, well, she's really smart, because that's the way your boss introduced you. And so that's another great micro action all of us can take is, what is it that we want to do and say for those who could get more visibility, and be very specific in those introductions. Once you open a door, there's all sorts of new opportunities that you brought for that person. They can carry themselves from there. But how hard is it to do an introduction? How long does it take you to do that? It's a pretty easy thing to do. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this version of Speak Her Mind, which is so special and fun for me personally to have these incredible women, incredible friends. I watch what you're doing and just continue to be inspired by you. So happy to be part of the Operator Collective, community. That's a really awesome thing for me personally. But again, you've shared today with our Speaker Mind community so many tips and life challenges and ideas of what people can do to either get involved in venture capital, which was, the topic of our discussion today, dissolving the barriers in venture capital for females and for people of color, but also just tips and tricks of how we all do better and support each other and advocate for each other. So a huge, sincere thank you to both Malin and Layla from the Namely team, from me, and also to the Operator Collective broader team. Thank you for bringing us together today and being a part of making this happen. Signing off for the latest version of Speaker Mind. See you next time.